Welcome and good morning, good afternoon in the East Coast, and also good evening where you're at, Sarah. So welcome to Match Day. My name is Vince, and two really special guests today. Linda Lowe, who actually has relocated to Columbus in Ohio, and then Sarah McQuade, who is you have a house in Massachusetts, but currently you're in the UK. So thank you so much. I know it's later there, and we appreciate you coming on. So what we're going to do today is talk about coach mentoring, and these two are basically the leaders in their field with what they do, and they're wonderful presenters and great people too. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Linda and let them kind of go. But what I'll try and do is monitor the chat box as well. So please be patient. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started. So welcome.
Vince, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with your legion of coaches. And the first thing I do want to sort of say to everybody is that I hope you are home and safe and well and managing to navigate this really strange time as well as you possibly can. When Vince asked us to come and join this sort of webinar program, we were absolutely delighted. And we really then started to think about, well, what could we possibly talk about? And actually what we do know is, and we're making an assumption here that as directors of coaching, as head coaches, is that you are all in some way, shape or form responsible for other coaches. And what we want to do is to help you think about how you can continue to support those coaches through this really challenging period. So Vince, I'm going to ask you to click the button and just move us on, and you can click it 3 times. And I am guessing that many of you can relate fairly effortlessly to that top left-hand corner in terms of your coaching space. I'm sure you can relate fairly effortlessly to the coaching picture in the middle. I'm guessing the picture that you're finding the hard to resonate with is this one at the bottom, which is this sort of brand new space that we find ourselves in because sport is now sitting under the banner of essential closures, and with the whole focus now on social distancing and self-isolation, youth sport, all sport has sort of effectively gone to ground. So you are in this sort of really weird and very, very different space. And if any of you want to use the chat box to comment quite briefly on your experiences and your feelings associated with it, then please do share those with us. But again, we'll keep coming back to the notion that yes, that there is this hideous time, and yes, the world keeps turning. And what we want to do is to help you, and Vince, if you could just click onto the next screen, is to help you think about how you can best continue to help coaches develop their coaching. Because for any number of reasons, coaches are now working from home with potentially significant amount more time on their hands than they had before. And the question that begs is, what are the tools that we have at our disposal that we can use to help them? So what I'm going to do is ask my dear friend and colleague, Linda, to introduce one of those tools to you.
Thanks, Vince. If you can just click on again, please. So one of the most famous models in coaching terms, and that's coaching in a business sense, as well as the development and mentoring of coaches, is the GROW model. And this model came from a gentleman called John Whitmore in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's a model that's used because of the effectiveness that it has in empowering people to find their own solutions and be much more likely to employ those solutions. So we just click on and look at the first one in terms of this. It's about the establishment of goals. What is it that the person is really trying to work on and trying to achieve? From there, we move on to the reality. And that's exploring the current situation. And investing time exploring the current situation is absolutely key. Because sometimes through taking the time for the reflection on that situation, it helps reshape the goal, it helps clarify the goal, or it helps identify the coach, realize that I'm not really bad at something. Some of the time I can be effective. Well, and then we can begin to explore what causes the effectiveness, when are they effective, when are they less effective. So investing time in the reality is one of the key aspects of this model that enables you to help a coach self-reflect, to really identify what they are doing and what they're not doing. Which leads us into the next phase, the O, and a real time to explore all of the options that would be available to help develop the goal that they've focused on. And a key aspect of these options is really spending the time and looking at it without constraints. If time and money was no object, if you were able to go and coach your players today, what might you do? So the options is a chance to dream before we begin to filter more into the final step in terms of what next. So this model is a lovely process to guide conversations as we help coaches think about the areas that they would like to develop. It could be anything at all can fit around support through this GROW model. And don't be frightened as you look at this model, as I said, to spend more time in the reality, the reflection on the current situation. So both the coach and yourself are absolutely clear on what is actually happening. So if we look at the next slide. So, thank you. So we look at the next slide. If we look at the goal and if we click again, the real intent here is to be able to drill down and get to something that's clear and measurable. Something about that goal and the development of the person that we can measure, that by the time we get to it, we will know what success looks like. And if we look at the reality, that real raising awareness, what is currently happening, what obstacles need to be overcome. Then we move to the options, and that's as wide a range of possibility as possible. As I mentioned, let's dream to begin with, and then become more realistic. And then finally, help them choose an action, help them develop the plan. And I'm using those words deliberately. Help them, don't tell them. Let them have ownership of the process and ownership of the solutions. And I guess that sort of leads us into the principles, Sarah, if you want to pick back up.
Sure. And again, the last point that Linda had just made was really focused on not telling them. So the GROW model is a process that we can use, which is really an enabling process, which is designed to help people think for themselves. And our job really here is to facilitate their learning. So Vince, I'm just going to ask you to make the first click. So in terms of facilitating their learning, we always have to start with that person's agenda. Hence the fact that goals is positioned right at the beginning. And if we are going to start with the person's agenda, then we need to be able to respect and acknowledge that agenda. And again, Vince, if you can click. And in order to respect that, we do need to really focus in on building a positive relationship. You can click again, in fact, 2 or 3 clicks here. And really, the process that we use is one of professional curiosity, where we ask questions that are aligned to the GROW framework, that we actively listen, we avoid the temptation to tell. And we use questions, not just to raise awareness, but to explore and to challenge and to help people think. We use questions to help people identify key actions and think about how they're going to embed and address those actions. If you can click again, what we're really trying to do is to help each person take responsibility for what they're going to do moving forward. And again, encouraging them to be responsible requires us, and again, Vince, another click. In fact, you could click all the way to the end. Encouraging them to be responsible means that we are open-minded, we're not value judging, we're not telling. And again, our job here is to help them exhaust all of the options they possibly can. I think you've got one or two more. So what we're suggesting here is that this is a model and this is a framework that you can use with your coaches to help them identify what they can do, not just during this current period, but at all times. So we have a little challenge. And again, I can see a couple of you engaging with the chat box. And Vince, if you could just click onto the next slide. What I'm going to ask you to think about is think about a coach or the coaches you are currently working with. Inevitably, you're working with them remotely, and inevitably, you're using a complete mix of technologies to sustain your conversation with them. But imagine if you could have an in-person conversation, much like we're doing here. We'd really like you to think about what are the questions that you could use to help a coach help themselves in terms of continuing their own professional development. So 1 or 2 minutes, have a think about the different questions that you could use to help people establish their goals. And again, don't worry about spelling or typos, just get the questions down in that chat box.
Sarah, are you able to see those?
I can see some of the chat. The last chat I've seen is from Ian, which says, do you find it more difficult for boys teams to create a goal or share goals than female teams or play? Great question.
Yep. Okay, good.
Now, what I'm not sure about here, team, is whether most of you are directors of coaching or whether most of you are coaches. But actually, it doesn't matter because you can use this process with coaches and with athletes. So what I will do is ask you to think with your respective hat on. If you're a director of coaching, think about helping coaches. Ian, if you're thinking with your coaching hat on, think about how you could help your teams, your individuals, set their own agendas. So just take a minute or two. Nice.
Yeah, and Sarah and Linda, I mean, I apologize. I can't see the chat box because I'm doing the screen share, but hopefully you two can facilitate the question. Go from there.
Nice. Brent, that's really nice from a context-specific perspective. Great question, Brent. I think you're heading into some of the options there. So the question that says, how do you learn best, is a question that you would use to facilitate their learning around what's the very best option for you and how will you. address that option. And a lovely question there to the coaches: what do you want your players to be capable of at the end of the season, which would give you that overarching goal, wouldn't it?
Very good. Yeah.
And again, Linda, if you can see the chat box, feel free to jump on one or two of these. And again, start to think now about the rest of the process and the other questions you would ask as you would move through the goals, the reality, the options, the what next. Rob, what a lovely question. Let me just read it out. How do you navigate when it is only you as a coach and there isn't another coach with you? I'm speaking as a college coach. What are the things that these coaches can do, ideas? What are the great ideas to assist in self-development during this time? Sounds bizarre, Rob, but it is ever so possible to almost do a self-grow. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute. Ian, some lovely observations there about how to work with or how your experiences of working with girls squads and boys squads. That anecdotal stuff really powerful in terms of the girls finding it slightly easier than the boys. Vince, I'm sort of conscious of the time. I know you said it was sort of 15, 20 minutes.
No.
How are we doing?
I can't see the time, but I'm sure as long as the audience is engaged, then let's keep going.
Okay. Okay. So what I'm gonna need that magic clicking finger of yours, Vince. So and again, I am conscious of time because I know people, and we'll just do this one at a time. But if you can click on the goal, reminding us of the intent, the questions here around, and again, you've nailed them. What's the issue? What do you want to achieve? What's your goal for you? And again, I think there's a really useful question here that says, in terms of success, what will success look like much further down the road? And then what if we can establish what success looks like longer term, what we can then do is to come back and establish those interim goals from kind of a medium and a short term perspective, which allows us to scaffold their development journey from this point to wherever it is that they want to go.
I think, Sarah, just to add another one in there, with regards to the goal, I think what the success looks like is a really useful question, but also in some situations, it's what does success feel like? So if a coach is feeling particularly challenged about an issue and feeling that the issue is difficult, it's also raising awareness of what success would feel like, which really actually gets us buy-in to wanting to get there. Because if you think when you've been in a difficult situation, how it impacts upon you, and imagining what it would feel like to have it resolved really, really helps with this process as well.
Do you want to pick up on reality, Linda, while you're there?
Sure. So really thinking about, and I mentioned it before, this reality section, as far as I'm concerned, is possibly the most important. We do think about, as coaches, they spend a long, long time reflecting about what their players are doing, but not necessarily what they're doing themselves as coaches. And this forces that reflection to say, what is actually really happening? Can you describe to me the situation? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What's really happening? And now what's stopping you make it the success that you've imagined? So really investing time in that reality is so, so important. And as it says at the bottom there, through that exploration, the coach might choose to reset the goal or modify the goal or choose part of the goal to explore in real detail. It's a hugely important section, and don't underestimate spending time there.
The options piece. when we are working with our coaches and our players, there's a temptation in the first instance to restrict their thinking. So we might ask a question that says, what are all of your options? And once we've got 2 or 3 on the table, we might just sort of stop it there. But actually, I think there's some follow-on questions here that says, what are all of the things you could do? What else could you do? What are all of the other things that you could do if your thinking wasn't restricted? And really, what we want people to do is to engage in some really blue sky thinking. Don't attempt to filter the thinking with any pragmatism at this stage. Just let them shoot for the moon and see what happens. Because at some point, what we will have to do is, when we're asking people to actually commit to what specifically they're going to do, we've got to take this thinking and let it fall to earth. And at the point at which we let the thinking fall to earth, we'll start to filter based on the time they have available, the cost of the professional development, how relevant or how useful it is. But at this point, it's what are all of the different things, and then what?
And then we really move into that reality, that turning it into what next. It's about helping them identify the actions that will have the biggest difference and make the impact for them. So the real challenge here is not forcing your thoughts of what you think they should do. It's giving the time and space for the coach themselves to identify the option they'll choose, the support that they'd need, the time scale, and how they'll know they've succeeded. The real key aspect there is the what will you do now? And actually helping them be able to explore and identify support is a really useful input that you can make. So it's not what they will do, let them choose. Let them help, and then help them identify how to get there, where they could look for support, some support that you could give them, resources that you could direct them to, things that will help them achieve the actual actions that they've chosen.
So that's a very, very quick overview of the GROW model. And as Linda said, it was created by a fellow called John Whitmore, who had used it in the context of business coaching. But this isn't actually a tool that you can use inside of any helping relationship. In terms of where and how this has been positioned within soccer, it really is a tool that coach developers can use as part of their responsibility to help develop coaching expertise. But Ian, you're absolutely right. You can use it with your athletes as well. Vince, if you could just sort of click on one more. But Linda and I, working with Vince and Ian and United Soccer Coaches, have created a coach developer diploma. And the whole concept of mentoring sits as one of the modules within the coach developer diploma. And it's that module around the mentoring that really helps us do a deep dive into not just the GROW model as one of the tools, but the whole concept of mentoring. What we're also doing, as I'm sure you are, is looking to transition much of our learning to sit online. So my mentor, who have a partnership with United Soccer Coaches, are very shortly about to launch their Mentoring Soccer Coaches course. So what I will say is, please do keep your eyes peeled for that. If you think that mentoring is something that you could use to help yourself, to help your coaches, and also to help your athletes. And I will happily share with Vince sort of the links to my mentor as and when that course is ready, and that should be within the next week.
Thank you so much. Looks like you two totally took care of the chat box, which is wonderful. First off, thank you again for taking your time. But I just wanted to share, and you mentioned Sir John Whitmore. And this is a book that I picked up a few years ago. You mentioned it was a kind of a business type. The Grow Model is a business type book, but it's just called Effective Modern Coach by Miles Downey, and in there is the actual Grow Model, right? So it's right in there. And so if you want more of Sarah and Linda, which you should, because they're two of the best in this profession, is we do offer the Coach Developer Diploma, and please look out for that. And hopefully we can once we get back to some normalcy, we can do this live. But and the other thing too is Ian and I have been given the task to kind of rewrite our courses, and one of those things is to really develop the roles of the coach. And one of the things that I think is often neglected is the role reflection that the coach has, and the Grow Model is in there. So again, and that's tribute to Sarah and Linda's work, right? And how you've helped us hopefully shape our courses going forward. But and by the way, my wife wants to ask Sarah, is Tom Brady as dreamy live as he is, as you see him on the TV? Because you've got a chance to work with him. So anyway, pretty cool. But
I can confirm.
Well, and anybody that wants the slide deck that Sarah just presented, she graciously put up her email. But thank you all very much for your time. And Sarah, Linda, thank you so much. Please be safe and be healthy. And God bless. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Many thanks, Vince.
Take
care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you, everybody.